He stood there, leaning on a fence post worn smooth by decades of hands, just like his calloused, strong, but now trembling slightly. Elias Thorne surveyed his land, but saw only ghosts. The ghosts of green corn stalks, the ghosts of grazing cattle, the ghosts of rain that never came. The sky overhead, a vast, indifferent gray canvas, mirrored the emptiness gnawing inside him. Debt was a shadow that stretched longer each day, threatening to swallow the legacy built by his father and grandfather. He believed his biggest battle was against the cracked earth and the silent phone in the bank manager's office. He had absolutely no idea that the real storm was brewing not just in the clouds, but miles away, barreling down a paved highway before taking an impulsive turn, a turn that would lead a gleaming silver sedan straight into the heart of struggle, and change everything, all because of a simple choice made in the pouring rain, knee-deep in mud. Would a lifetime of quiet integrity finally yield a harvest of hope? Elias Thorne was a man carved from the landscape he inhabited. 63 years etched onto his face by sun and wind and worry. His frame sturdy but bowed, like an old oak enduring a long winter. Thorne Acres wasn't just property. It was lineage, memory, the repository of his family's sweat and dreams. His grandfather had cleared this land. His father had expanded it. And Elias was fighting desperately not to be the one who lost it. The drought, they said, was the worst in a generation. Dust coated everything, a fine, persistent layer that settled in the lines of his hands and the corners of the quiet farmhouse kitchen. His days were a testament to dwindling hope. Mornings began before the first hint of dawn. The ritual check of the well, revealing a water level that dropped lower each week. The irrigation pump, patched with salvaged parts and sheer stubbornness, coughed and sputtered like an old man climbing stairs. He'd walk the perimeter fence line, replacing rusted wire, his eyes scanning the skeletal remains of his corn crop. Stalks bleached pale, ears stunted and empty. He'd sold the last of his small cattle herd months ago, the rising cost of feed an insurmountable hurdle. Now, only a handful of scrawny chickens scratched futilely at the compacted earth near the barn, their hopeful clucking a stark contrast to the silence that usually enveloped the farm. The barn itself, once a proud symbol of prosperity, now sagged slightly, its red paint faded to a dusty rose. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of dry hay and old machinery. His tractor, a machine almost as old as he was, required constant coaxing. He'd spend hours hunched over its greasy engine, his hands deftly manipulating worn wrenches, whispering encouragements to the stubborn metal. Each successful start felt like a small victory against the encroaching tide of failure. Evenings offered little respite. Spread across the worn oak table in the kitchen, beneath the glow of a single bare bulb, were the ledgers, columns of figures that refused to balance, expenses starkly outweighing the non-existent income. Beside them lay the letters from the bank, each one colder and more formal than the last. Foreclosure wasn't just a word. It was a looming presence, a dread that settled in his stomach and kept him awake long after the moon had risen. The farmhouse held the echoes of a fuller life. Clean, yes, meticulously so, Martha wouldn't have stood for mess, but sparsely furnished, reflecting years of making do. On the mantelpiece, a framed photograph captured a younger Elias, his arm around a smiling woman with kind eyes. Martha. 5 years she'd been gone, taken by an illness that swept through her quickly, leaving a void in the house and in his heart that the intervening years hadn't filled. Sometimes, standing at the sink washing the solitary dinner plate, he'd find himself talking to her picture, sharing the day's burdens, asking for advice he knew would never come. The pump's acting up again, Marth. He might murmur, or, "That letter from the bank. Don't know what we're going to do." The silence that answered was the loneliest sound in the world. Yet, woven to the fabric of his hardship was an innate thread of decency. He religiously refilled the old metal basin by the road with water from the precious well supply, knowing stray animals suffered in the heat too. Barn cats, sleek and well-fed despite the farm struggles, rubbed against his legs at milking time. Though there were no cows left to milk, he still put out scraps for them. When the rare delivery truck rumbled down his lane, he always offered the driver a cold glass of water, even if it meant less for himself later. It wasn't conscious charity. It was simply ingrained habit, the quiet code of rural life, the way Martha had taught him people ought to treat each other. But the constant grind, the isolation, the gnawing fear, it was slowly eroding him, chipping away at the stoic resilience he'd always prided himself on. He felt adrift, his world shrinking to perimeter fence and the threatening letters on the table. Then, one afternoon, the sky finally broke, not with the gentle, soaking rain the land craved, but with a sudden, ferocious violence. Thunder didn't rumble. It cracked, sharp and close, like artillery fire. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid sheets, hammering the tin roof of the porch, turning the dusty yard into a churning sea of mud within minutes. Elias stood watching, a familiar mix of gratitude and apprehension churning within him. Water. Finally. But this much, this fast? It meant erosion, flash floods in the creek bed, and the dirt access road alongside his property. It would become a treacherous, impassable bog. His gaze swept the rain-lashed panorama, squinting against the deluge. That's when he saw it, an incongruous gleam of polished silver against the monochrome brown and gray. A car, an expensive one, low-slung and utterly unsuited for this terrain, had slewed sideways off the road, maybe 50 yards past his fence line. It was tilted precariously, its rear wheels sunk deep in the rapidly liquefying mud. He could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the engine as the driver tried to accelerate, the tires spinning futilely, flinging arcs of thick, reddish-brown muck into the air. The driver's side door opened, and a young woman emerged. Even through the downpour, Elias could see she was dressed with city tailored trousers, a stylish jacket, shoes that vanished immediately as she stepped into the mire. She surveyed the scene, her posture radiating a mixture of disbelief and mounting panic. She pulled out a sleek smartphone, held it aloft hopefully, then lowered it with a visible sigh of frustration. No signal. Elias knew that struggle well. The nearest reliable cell tower was miles away. She put a hand to her forehead, looking small and terribly out of place, swallowed by the vast, indifferent storm. Elias felt a pang of something akin to sympathy, quickly followed by a wave of bone-deep weariness. He'd just finished wrestling with a jam gate latch, his muscles ached, and the rain meant that persistent leak in the barn roof needed immediate attention. Plus, a section of fencing down by the creek was almost certainly damaged by the sudden rush of water. This woman's predicament. It wasn't really his problem. She was on a county road, not his land. She made a poor choice, taking this route in this weather. Someone would find her eventually. A tow truck, maybe, if she could ever get a call out. He had his own disasters to manage. He turned, ready to head toward the barn. But then, clear as day, he heard Martha's voice in his mind. Now, Elias Thorne, you know better than that. You see someone in trouble, you help. Doesn't matter if it's inconvenient. Doesn't matter if they brought it on themselves. You just help. He stopped, his hand on the porch railing. He pictured Martha's gently disapproving frown. He sighed, the sound swallowed by the roar of the rain. She was right. Of course, she was right. He couldn't just leave the young woman stranded out there, alone and likely scared, as daylight began to fade. It simply wasn't in him. Pulling his old, oil-stained raincoat tighter around his shoulders, a coat that smelled perpetually of earth and damp wool, and jamming his feet into the cracked but serviceable rubber boots that lived by the door, Elias stepped off the porch and began the muddy trek toward the road. He moved slowly, deliberately, planting each foot carefully in the sucking mud. The The rain plastered his gray hair to his forehead and streamed down his face, cold against his skin. As he drew closer, the young woman looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing slightly with a flicker of apprehension. He knew how he must look, a rough, weathered farmer materializing out a gray curtain of rain, mud clinging to his boots and trousers. City folks sometimes got spooked easily out here. He stopped a polite few yards away, not want to crowd her. "Looks like you found some trouble," he called out, his voice rough from disuse, but carrying over the din of the storm. He kept his tone neutral, matter of fact. She visibly relaxed a fraction, pushing a wet strand of blonde hair from her eyes. "Trouble found me, I think," she replied, her voice strained but clear. This road just disappeared. 1 minute it was dirt, the next it was quicksand. She gestured helplessly at the trap car. Clay soil. Elias nodded, understanding dawning. Gets slick as grease on top, but turns to cement underneath when it's soaked. Happens fast. He surveyed the car's position, the angle, the depth of the mud engulfing the rear wheels. She stuck good and proper. He paused, meeting her anxious gaze. "Name's Elias Thorne. Reckon I can try and give you a hand getting her out." A wave of relief washed over her features, softening the tension around her eyes. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Amelia, by the way. Amelia Vance." "Pleasure, Amelia," Elias said, offering a slight, formal tip of his non-existent hat. He circled the car, his own boots sinking deep, gauging the extent of the problem. The chassis was resting on the mud ridge in the center of the road. This wouldn't be easy. "All right," he instructed. "Best chance is pushing from behind. You get back in, keep the steering wheel straight, and give it just a little gas when I tell you. Easy does it." Amelia nodded, wiping rain from her face with muddy hand, looking a little lost but clearly trusting his lead. She slid back into the driver's seat, the luxurious interior now marred by streaks of mud. Elias positioned himself at the rear bumper, planting his feet as firmly as he could in the slippery muck. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold metal under his palms. "Okay, easy now, a little bit of gas." The engine revved slightly. The wheels spun, showering Elias's back and legs with cold, gritty mud. The car groaned but didn't move an inch. He gritted his teeth, leaned harder, putting his shoulder into the trunk, feeling his boots slide backward. It felt like trying to dislodge a mountain. After a solid minute of straining, muscles burning, he straightened up, breathing heavily, rainwater dripping from his chin. "Nope. She's well and truly bogged," he announced, wiping his muddy hands on his equally muddy trousers. "Pushing alone isn't going to do it." His mind briefly went to the old tractor sitting silent in the barn. It had a powerful winch, but the battery had been unreliable lately, and the thought of getting that heavy machine stuck out here too sent a chill down his spine. That would be a catastrophe he simply couldn't afford, financially or practically. He glanced towards his farmhouse, a haven of comparative dryness, then back at Amelia's worried face in the car window. No, the tractor was too risky. It would have to be manpower, ingenuity, and maybe a bit of luck. "Hang tight," he told Amelia. "Got some old lumber back at the house. Might give us some traction if we can wedge it under the drive wheels." And he hesitated, glancing at her clean jacket, now hopelessly stained. "Might need your help pushing too, if you're willing. 2 sets of shoulders are better than 1. Amelia didn't hesitate for a second. "Absolutely. Whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do." She pushed the car door open again, stepping resolutely back out into the mud and rain, pulling her jacket sleeves down over her hands. There was a surprising steeliness in her demeanor that Elias hadn't initially noticed. He nodded curtly and turned back toward his property, his boots making loud, sucking noises with each step. Behind the dilapidated woodshed, Leaning against the wall were several thick, weathered planks of oak salvaged from some long-forgotten project. They were heavy, waterlogged, but strong. He hefted 2 of them onto his shoulder. On impulse, he ducked quickly into the quiet kitchen, grabbing the dented metal thermos from the counter, still holding about half its capacity of lukewarm coffee from breakfast. It wasn't much, but it was something warm against the damp chill. He screwed the lid on tight and headed back out. When he reached the car, Amelia was standing beside it, arms wrapped around herself, shivering visibly now, her teeth chattering slightly. Her earlier composure seemed to be fraying under the relentless cold and wet. "Here," Elias said gruffly, extending the thermos. "Might help take the edge off." Her eyes lit up with genuine gratitude. "Elias, thank you. That's incredibly thoughtful." She fumbled slightly with the cap, her fingers stiff with cold. Before managing to pour a little coffee into the lid cup, she took a tentative sip, closing her eyes for a moment as the warmth spread through her. "Oh, that's good." He nodded, then turned his attention back to the car. Together, they wrestled the heavy planks into position, shoving and maneuvering them under the rear tires, trying to create a firmer surface in the treacherous mud. It was awkward, messy work. The mud clung to everything, making their hands slip, coating the wood, splattering their faces. Finally, with the boards wedged as securely as possible, they positioned themselves side by side at the car's trunk. Elias felt the slightness of her frame next to his own weathered bulk, but sensed her determination. "All right, Amelia," he grunted, planting his feet wide. "Same plan. On the count of 3. Give it everything you've got. 1, 2, 3. Push." They threw their combined weight against the back of the sedan. Elias felt every muscle in his back and legs strain, the effort forcing a grunt from his lips. Beside him, Amelia pushed with surprising force, her jaw set, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Mud squelched under their boots, splattered upwards, covering them both in a thick brown layer. The car shuddered, rocked slightly, maybe moved forward an imperceptible inch, then settled back. They collapsed against the trunk, panting, the rain continuing its steady rhythm around them. "Wow!" Amelia gasped, trying to catch her breath. "That's really stuck." She attempted to wipe a blob of mud from her cheek with the back of her equally muddy hand, succeeding only in smearing it further. A small, unexpected chuckle escaped her. "I must look like a swamp creature." Elias managed a faint smile in return, the shared absurdity of the situation momentarily lightening the mood. "We both do," he admitted. "This clay, once it gets a hold, it doesn't like letting go." They rested for another minute, the silence broken only by the rain and their own ragged breathing. Amelia poured the last dregs of the coffee into the lid and offered it to Elias. He hesitated for a moment. It was her coffee now, but her expectant look made him take it. The lukewarm liquid tasted faintly bitter, but the warmth was welcome. Sharing the simple act seemed to dissolve another layer of awkwardness between them. "So," Amelia began again, her tone more conversational now, perhaps seeking distraction from the cold and the exertion. She gestured vaguely at the bleak landscape. "Is this your family farm, Elias?" He nodded, sipping the coffee. "Born here. Father farmed it before me. His father before him." He paused, the weight of that legacy pressing down even now. "Been Thorne land for nigh on 100 years. 800 years." Amelia repeated softly, looking around with new eyes. "That's incredible. But you said the drought?" Elias sighed, the brief respite over. "Aye, the drought." He didn't usually unload his troubles onto strangers, especially not young city women in fancy cars. But something about her genuine interest, the shared physical struggle, the isolation of the moment loosened his tongue. "Worst I've ever seen. Worst my father ever saw. 2. We had a decent herd of cattle. Had to sell 'em off last spring. Feed costs just got too high. The corn, he gestured toward the nearest field, a collection of pale, stunted stalks. Total loss this year. Nothing to harvest. He kicked absently at a clump of mud. Wells are low. Creeks barely a trickle most days till storms like this hit. And the bank. Well, banks ain't known for their patience when the payments stop coming. He hadn't meant to say so much, but the words tumbled out, heavy with months, years of pent-up worry. He expected polite sympathy, maybe an awkward silence. Instead, Amelia listened intently, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. I read reports, she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the struggling fields. My father, he's involved in agricultural policy at the state level. We discuss rural issues, subsidies, water rights, but it all sounds so abstract sometimes. Numbers on a page, committee meetings. She looked back at Elias, her eyes meeting his. Hearing it from you, seeing this, it makes it real. It makes it human. Elias absorbed her words. Governor Vance's daughter, discussing policy. It felt surreal, standing here coated in mud, his farm survival hanging by a thread, talking to someone so close to the levers of power that felt utterly remote from his reality. Policy don't mean much when your fields are cracked earth and the bills are piling up, he said, perhaps more bluntly than he intended. He wasn't trying to be rude, just stating the harsh truth of his world. Amelia didn't flinch. She nodded slowly. I understand. Or, I'm trying to. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders again. Well, listening won't get this car out. Ready for another try. Ready as I'll ever be, Elias replied, pushing himself away from the car. They took their positions again. Side by side, two vastly different people united by mud and a shared objective. All right, heave, Elias yelled, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the push. He felt Amelia straining beside him, her whole body trembling with the effort. There was a loud sucking sound from beneath the tires, a groan of protesting metal, and then movement, slow, grudging but definite. The car lurched forward, tires finding purchase on the edge of the planks. Inch by agonizing inch, it crawled forward. Keep going. Keep pushing. Elias urged, his voice hoarse. They scrambled alongside, maintaining pressure, slipping, regaining their footing, their breath coming in ragged bursts. Another few feet, then another, and suddenly, the front wheels hit the slightly firmer gravel edge of the access road proper. The car rolled forward under its own momentum for a few yards, and then stopped, blessedly free from the mud's tenacious grip. A profound wave of exhaustion and relief washed over Elias, so intense it almost made his vision swim. He leaned heavily against the now mud-caked trunk, gasping for air, his heart pounding against his ribs. Beside him, Amelia let out a shaky laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. Oh my gosh, we actually did it. We did it. She turned and, without thinking, threw her muddy arms around Elias in a spontaneous hug. He stood stiffly for a second, surprised by the contact, before awkwardly patting her back. She pulled away quickly, her cheeks flushed. Sorry, she mumbled, suddenly embarrassed. Got carried away. But Elias, truly, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. Her gratitude felt palpable, radiating warmth despite the cold rain that had finally begun to lessen, easing into a steady drizzle. Glad we could get you moving again, Elias managed, finding his own breath. He felt a strange sense of accomplishment, a small spark of warmth in the midst of his bleak circumstances. Amelia looked down at herself, then at Elias, both of them utterly coated in drying mud. Look at us, she said, a rueful smile playing on her lips. definitely not dress for success. She began trying to scrape the worst of the muck off her trousers, a mostly futile effort. I was actually trying to take a scenic detour on my way back, she explained, her voice regaining some normalcy. Needed to clear my head before a big family dinner tonight. My father, he tends to worry if I'm late, especially if I wander off the main highways. She paused, digging inside her mud-streaked jacket pocket and retrieving a surprisingly intact wallet. She fumbled it open, her fingers still stiff. Elias, please. You have to let me pay you for your time. Your trouble. You probably saved me hundreds on a tow truck, if one could even get out here. She started to pull out a wad of bills, more cash than Elias typically saw in a month. He held up a hand, stopping her gently but firmly. His pride, perhaps the only thing the drought hadn't completely eroded, bristled at the thought of taking money for simply helping someone. No, ma'am. Amelia, I couldn't accept that. But you spent hours helping me. You're covered in mud. You use your own supplies. She protested, looking genuinely perplexed by his refusal. Out here, Elias said, his voice quiet but firm, meeting her gaze directly. We help our neighbors. We help strangers, too, when they're in a fix. Doesn't matter who they are or what they have. It's just what you do. The rain's free. The mud's free. The help is too. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly followed by something deeper, respect, perhaps even admiration. She slowly closed her wallet and tucked it away. Well, thank you feels completely inadequate, but thank you, Elias, from the bottom of my heart. She hesitated, chewing her lip for a moment as if wrestling with a decision. Then she seemed to make up her mind. There's something else. You mentioned my father. Well, my father is Governor Vance. Elias blinked, processing this new piece of information. Governor Mark Vance, the man whose face adorned campaign posters tacked to telephone poles along the state highway, the man whose voice on the radio promised support for rural communities, like his promises that often fell hollow when faced with the reality of cracked earth and mounting debt. He tried to reconcile the image of the polished politician shaking hands at county fairs with this young woman, his daughter, standing before him shivering, covered head to toe in the mud from his failing farm. Amelia watched his face closely, perhaps expecting awe or maybe suspicion, but Elias felt neither, just a quiet click of understanding. It explained the expensive car, her mention of agricultural policy, the slight air of confidence she carried even when stranded. Governor Vance, he repeated slowly, the name feeling strange on his tongue in this context. He simply nodded. Well, best get yourself cleaned up and on your way then, Miss Vance. Don't want to keep the governor waiting for his dinner. A relieved smile spread across Amelia's face. Amelia, please. And yes, I should go. Thanks to you. She glanced around again, her gaze lingering on the struggling fields, the weathered farmhouse, the vast, damp sky. You know, she said thoughtfully, I wasn't just aimlessly driving. I was actually returning from visiting a potential site for a new rural outreach initiative my father's office is exploring. I want to get off the interstate, see some of the back roads firsthand, try to understand things beyond the briefing papers and statistics. Her eyes met his again, holding a newfound seriousness. Talking with you today, Elias, seeing your farm, hearing your story, even pushing my car out of the mud with you, it's given me a perspective that no report ever could. Elias considered her words. Glad my mud could offer some perspective, he replied, a hint of dry irony creeping into his tone. He wasn't sure what difference her perspective might make, but he appreciated the sentiment. Amelia laughed, a genuine, warm sound that felt strangely comforting in the dreary afternoon. You did more than that, Elias. Much more. She opened her car door, pausing one last time before getting in. "This help, your kindness today, it won't be forgotten. I promise you that." He watched her drive away, navigating the still slick road with caution until the silver car disappeared around a curve in the distance. Elias stood alone on the muddy roadside, the rain now just a fine mist hanging in the air. The scent of wet earth rose around him, heavy and fecund. Governor Vance's daughter. He shook his head slowly, a peculiar mixture of profound weariness and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of something else, not quite hope, but perhaps possibility. He turned and began the slow walk back to his silent farmhouse, the mud clinging heavily to his boots, the weight of his reality threatening to settle back onto his shoulders. He didn't expect anything to come of the encounter. He'd done what Martha would have wanted. He'd helped someone in need. That was usually where stories like this ended. The next few days blurred into a familiar pattern of hard work and quiet worry. The sun returned with vengeance, baking the mud into a hard, cracked crust, emphasizing the drought's cruel grip. Elias repaired the fence by the creek, patched the barn roof as best he could, and spent another frustrating afternoon coaxing the tractor back to life. The conversation with Amelia Vance began to feel like a surreal interlude, a strange dream conjured by the storm. The bank letters on the kitchen table, however, were starkly real. The latest one used blunt, unambiguous language. Final notice: initiation of foreclosure proceedings. Vacate the property. Hope felt not just distant, but utterly foolish. Then, on Thursday morning, the sound of an unfamiliar engine broke the quiet. Elias looked out the kitchen window to see a sturdy, dark blue truck with the state seal emblazoned on the door pulling slowly up his long, dusty driveway. It wasn't the bank, and it certainly wasn't another luxury sedan. Two people emerged, a man with a friendly, open face and a woman with observant eyes, both dressed in practical khakis and sturdy boots, carrying clipboards. Elias watched them approach the porch, his stomach tightening with a familiar nod of apprehension. More officials? What now? Had the bank sent appraisers? He stepped out onto the porch as they reached the bottom step. The man smiled warmly. "Mr. Elias Thorne?" Elias nodded, his expression guarded. "I am." "Good morning, sir. My name is David Chun, and this is my colleague, Dr. Isabella Ramirez. We're with the State Agricultural Extension Service." Elias frowned, puzzled. "Extension Service? I haven't called the Extension Service in years. What can I do for you?" "Well, actually, we received a rather specific request," David Chun explained, his gaze direct and kind. "It came through the governor's office yesterday afternoon. They asked us to come out, meet with you, learn about your operation here, and see if there might be any state resources, technical assistance, or programs that could potentially help mitigate the impact of the severe drought you're experiencing." Elias stared, momentarily speechless. The governor's office? Amelia? She had actually done something? He remembered her promise. It won't be forgotten, but he hadn't truly believed anything would come of it. Politicians and their families lived in a different world. "We understand conditions have been exceptionally challenging in this part of the state," Dr. Ramirez added, her voice gentle but professional. "Miss Amelia Vance shared some details of her roadside encounter with you. She expressed significant concern about the viability of farms like yours facing this prolonged drought. She specifically requested we prioritize a visit and explore all available practical support options." Practical support, not just sympathy. Elias felt a flicker, a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. For the next 3 hours, David Chun and Dr. Ramirez didn't just talk. They listened. They walked the fields with Elias, kneeling to examine the parched soil, asking insightful questions about his crop history, his irrigation methods, the health of his well. They inspected his aging equipment with knowledgeable eyes, offering practical suggestions for maintenance. They didn't offer pity. They offered expertise. They spoke about new drought-resistant sorghum hybrids showing promise in university trials, about potential cost-sharing grants for installing more efficient drip irrigation systems, about cover cropping techniques to improve soil moisture retention, things Elias had vaguely heard about but never had the resources or guidance to implement. They sat with him at the worn kitchen table, spreading out maps and brochures alongside the ominous stack of bank letters. Elias felt a cautious wall he hadn't realized he'd built around his hope begin to crumble, brick by careful brick. Then Davidson cleared his throat, tapping a particular document. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his tone becoming more serious. "Based on everything you've told us, and looking at the farm's operational history and your current financial standing, especially considering the governor officially declared this region a drought disaster area last month, it appears you are strongly eligible for the state's Farm Preservation Loan Modification Program." Elias looked blankly at the paper, then back at David. "Loan modification?" "Yes, sir," David confirmed, leaning forward slightly. "It's a state-backed initiative specifically designed to assist long-established family farms, like Thorne Acres, that are facing economic hardship due to declared natural disasters like this drought. It allows for restructuring existing agricultural debt under more favorable terms, potentially lowering interest rates, extending repayment periods, and, crucially," he paused, letting the word sink in, "it can halt foreclosure proceedings while the application is processed and potentially provide a sustainable path forward." Halt foreclosure proceedings. A sustainable path forward. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. Elias stared down at the form David had placed in front of him, the official state seal blurring through the sudden moisture welling in his eyes. He thought of his father, his grandfather, the generations who had poured their lives into this land. He thought of Martha, of their shared dreams for this place. He thought of the gnawing, constant fear that had been a companion for so long. And suddenly, the weight of it all became unbearable. But this time, it wasn't crushing him. It was escaping him. He lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking, and a sound escaped him, a ragged sob, torn from a place of deep, long-held pain and burgeoning relief. He hadn't cried like this, not with such wrenching intensity, since the day he buried Martha. David and Dr. Ramirez sat in respectful silence, giving him the space he needed. After a long moment, Elias fumbled for the handkerchief he always carried, wiping his eyes, feeling both embarrassed and incredibly, overwhelmingly lighter. He looked up, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know. I had no idea such a program even existed." "That's unfortunately common," Dr. Ramirez said softly. "The application process can seem complex, and often folks who need it most are too overwhelmed or don't know where to turn. That's precisely why the Extension Service is here, Mr. Thorne. We can walk you through every step of the paperwork, help you gather the necessary documentation, advocate on your behalf." It wasn't charity. It wasn't a handout. It was a structured, practical lifeline, extended exactly when he needed it most, facilitated by an unexpected encounter in the mud. It was a chance, a real chance. Nearly a week later, as Elias was meticulously filling out the loan modification forms with newfound determination, the phone rang. He picked it up, expecting perhaps another call from David Chun with a question about his records. "Elias? It's Amelia Vance." He paused, surprised to hear her voice. "Miss Vance. Amelia. Hello there." "Hi." Her voice sounded warm, friendly. "I was just calling to check in. David Chun from the Extension Service mentioned they'd had a good visit with you last week. I hope it was helpful." "Helpful?" Elias let out a short, breathy laugh, tinged with disbelief. "Amelia, helpful doesn't begin to cover it. What you did, setting that up, those folks, they know their business. And this loan program. He trailed off, emotion clogging his throat again. It might just be the thing that saves his farm. Saves everything. "Oh, Elias, I'm so glad to hear that," Amelia replied, and he could hear the genuine relief and pleasure in her voice. "Honestly, meeting you that day, it made a real impact on me. Hearing about your struggles firsthand, seeing your connection to this land, it put all those policy debates in perspective. Sometimes I think people in government, even my father, need a tangible reminder of what's really at stake for families like yours. You gave me that reminder, Elias." He cleared his throat, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. "Well, your reminder, it came at just the right time. So, thank you, Amelia. Truly, thank you for not just driving away and forgetting. Thank you for listening. And for making that call. Thank you, Elias," she said softly, her voice sincere, "for your kindness, for helping a stranger stuck in the mud. You helped me that day, too, probably more than you know." They talked for a few minutes longer, a comfortable, easy conversation that bridged a vast difference in their worlds. Amelia asked about the specific crops the agents had recommended, and Elias found himself asking about her father, the governor, not as a remote figurehead, but as her father. It felt normal. Human, a connection forged not by status or politics, but by shared experience and mutual respect. The months that followed were still defined by relentless hard work, but the quality of the labor had changed. The desperation was gone, replaced by a focused determination. Elias, guided by the extension, service and buoyed by the restructured loan that eased the immediate financial pressure, planted fields of drought-resistant sorghum and invested in a small, efficient drip irrigation system for his vegetable patch. He rose before dawn, not with dread, but with purpose. His muscles still ached at the end of the day, but his spirit felt lighter, regenerated. Slowly, Thorne Acres began to show signs of revival. Elias repaired the sagging barn door, replaced the missing shingles on the farmhouse roof, and even gave the porch railings a fresh coat of white paint. He bought a dozen new laying hens, their cheerful clucking adding a welcome sound of farmyard. He started attending local farmer meetings again, sharing the information he'd learned from the extension service, reconnecting with neighbors he'd drifted away from during his hardest times. The loneliness hadn't vanished entirely. Martha's absence was a permanent fixture, but the crushing isolation had eased. The farm felt less like a burden and more like a promise again. One crisp autumn afternoon, sorting through the mail, Elias found a postcard tucked between a seed catalog and the electric bill. The picture showed a vibrant, colorful community garden somewhere urban, bursting with flowers and vegetables. He turned it over. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Elias saw this garden today and thought of our muddy adventure. Amazing what can grow in unexpected places with a little help and determination. Hope the harvest is treating you well. Keep fighting the good fight. Warmly, Amelia. Elias held the postcard for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his weathered face. He walked into the kitchen and tacked it carefully onto the corkboard next to the faded photograph of him and Martha. He looked from the picture of the thriving city garden to the picture of his smiling wife, then out the window at his own fields, where the sturdy sorghum stalks stood tall against the blue sky. The storm that had brought Amelia Vance skidding into his life had indeed changed everything, not through magic or miracle, but through the simple, powerful alchemy of human connection. An act of kindness, offered without calculation or expectation, had unexpectedly bridged the gap between a struggling farmer on the brink of despair and a governor's daughter seeking perspective. It was a potent reminder that empathy sees beyond circumstance, that listening can be as vital as lending a hand, and that sometimes the most profound help arrives covered in mud, offering not just a push, but a pathway back to hope. On Thorn Acres, the land was slowly healing, and so was the man who tended it, cultivating a future he once believed was lost forever, watered by the enduring grace of unexpected kindness.